Recording in progress.
Let us start now.
Okay.
Thank you all for joining. I know it's very early morning in USA, and Mary Scully has made it though earlier than me to this webinar. A very huge thank you to Mary for rising so early in the morning and joining this webinar. So I thank Shani, who's always been there on time. Thank you for being there. And Aliza Saeed Saab, who is the president of Kashmir Council EU, is with us from Brussels. So I think more people will join us in the course of time. We will be having also the message of Claire Bidwell from the UK, as she has school today, but she has sent us her recorded message for this webinar. We will play that also. As you know, this month, January is called the month of massacres in Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir. It was on the 19th of January 1990 when formally CRPF was given the charge of law and order. CRPF means Central Reserve Police Force, was given the charge of the Srinagar city in Kashmir and also throughout the valley of Kashmir. They were given the charge to make the law and order situation in Kashmir. And it was on that very day, soon after that, when then Jagmohan, who was the governor of the Indian occupied Kashmir, he conspirated and made the exodus of Kashmiri Pandits from Kashmir to a conspiracy in order to give free hand to the Indian army to kill the Kashmiri Muslims in the occupied territory. And then the events followed on 21st of January 1990. We saw the Gau Qadal massacre in Srinagar. More than 200 were injured in that massacre when CRPF fired at a peaceful protest, and they had a siege and search operation when they were torturing the youth, and then there was a protest, and CRPF then fired indiscriminately on the civilian population and killed more than 50 people, and more than 200 were injured in that carnage. And soon on the next day, on 22nd January 1990, another act of such did take place at Alamgari Bazar in Srinagar, in which 10 people were killed by the CRPF. Then on 25th of January 1990, we saw it was 25th 1990, it was India's before one day of the Indian Republic Day, which always comes with more miseries and more sorrows for the people of Kashmir. More restrictions are being imposed in Kashmir on that and before that day. Internet, though on those days there was no internet and nothing like that, but there was strict restrictions in the occupied Kashmir. And in a crackdown in Handwara, 21 people were massacred by the Indian forces in the Handwara town of northern district of Kupwara. It was on January 25th, 1990. Then on 19th January 1991, another carnage took place at Magarmal Bagh, Srinagar. 16 people were massacred in the town of Srinagar, in the locality of Srinagar. And on 6th of January 1993, we saw the brutal massacre of Sopore, when the market of Sopore and the residential houses in Sopore, trucks and cars were set ablaze by the Indian Army, and 57 people were killed in that, and most of them were burnt alive by the Indian occupation forces in the Sopore town. And then soon after that, we saw another massacre in Kupwara. It was on 27th of January 1994. Again, before 2 days of the so-called Indian Republic Day, then 27 people were killed when the Indian forces, under the command of the so-called Indian Defense Enlisted nowadays, General Bakshi, General J.D. Bakshi, who was at that time commander of the forces in Kopara, they indiscriminately fired on the people, and 27 people were killed in that massacre. And to follow that, on 25th of January 1998, when there was all those Hindu communities who were still living in Kashmir, this was not acceptable to the government of India. There was a village, Wanahama village in the locality of Ganderbal. That was the only community which did not leave the Kashmir on the request of Governor Jagmohan. Their carnage was staged by the Indian agencies when 28 Kashmiri Hindus were killed in that act. So these carnage took place in Kashmir in the month of January only. From 1990 till this date, we have seen this January being a month of massacres in Kashmir. Again, I must say, it's not only the month of January. There were other massacres. At least 19 massacres in Kashmir took place during the course of time. When the forces came out, they fired at the people indiscriminately. Some inquiries were held, some commissions were established, but none of the perpetrators was brought to justice till date. So this is a state of affair in occupied Jammu and Kashmir, and we will be discussing this and what measures at the level of civil society we can take. I have with me Mary Securely. I learn a lot from his Facebook page. I do acknowledge this. Most of the things, being a Kashmiri, being an activist, I do learn many things from her Facebook posts. She posts the history of Kashmir, the ongoing incidents in Kashmir, with the witnesses, with all the testimonies of the people, the account and the victims are giving. So I will firstly request Mary Sukuli for her remarks. Mary, you have the floor.
Yes. One thing about January is that I believe it's one of the coldest months usually in Kashmir. But the thing about is the massacres seems to be a method that the Indian Army uses, but there have been 100,000 people that have been killed in Kashmir since 1989, when they began their war against terrorism. I think in many ways, India's war against the Kashmiris, using this false alarm about terrorism, is really a part of how the war on terror, the ideology of the war on terror, developed as a war against Islamist terrorists. It's really a war in many ways against Muslims who resist terrorism, war, and occupation and genocide. But I think that the context of that has to be understood. What you pointed out, the elections, the electoral method had proven in the late 80s to be an impotent route for Kashmiris, because the Indian government rigged the elections. And as a result, that led to more young people turning their backs on that solution to occupation and colonialism, and they began turning to guerrillaism and to armed struggle. I don't think that there were ever significant numbers. I don't really know, but I know that even right-wing pandits like Aditya Call, the journalist, and who's the other fellow that wrote the book, The Moon Has Blood Clots, I forget his name. the Pandit right-wing ideologue, they're journalists. Even they acknowledge that at the time in 1989, 1990, there were only a handful of armed militants at all, but they try to portray it as if it was in fact militants that created a genocide against Pandits. And so in January 19, Jagmohan took over as governor of Jammu and Kashmir. And on the 19th, on that same day, was the first day that India began bussing out the Pandits, created a panic and alarm and began bussing out Pandits. It was 2 days later that the Gaul Kadal, I don't know if I'm saying that right, that the Gaul Kadal massacre took place. And that was a protest of reportedly 10,000 Kashmiris who came out to protest because Indian troops had begun with, since Jagmohan was there, had begun to make house-to-house invasions, had begun to move into houses, search homes under the ruse of looking for militants and looking for weapons and ammunitions that were stored there. They began assaulting women, vandalizing, and that sort of thing. So the Gaul Kadal protest was against that behavior, and that was the first massacre. As you said, there was one, there were several after that, including through May. And since then, 100,000 Kashmiris have been killed, 8,000 forcibly disappeared, thousands incarcerated, including young children. So in many ways, it fits the description of a genocide, of a not of the same character as the Rohingya genocide, but certainly a genocide. And I just want to say one last thing, and that is, in many ways, the removal, removal of the analog in Gaza, it's not an entire analog, but when Sharon, the prime minister, moved Israeli settlers out of Gaza, at the, I forget if it was the first or second Intifada, but he forcibly removed all of the illegal Israeli settlers out of Gaza, which made Gaza an easy, and has made it since, an easy target for genocide, where there's repeated mass carpet bombing of Gaza. In many ways, the removal of the Pandits is similar to that. I think you even alluded to it, where they remove the Pandits, and it makes a genocide of the Kashmiri Muslims much easier, much more efficient, and Hindus don't get caught in the crossfire, and they have to face criticism from Indians in India. So I think there's an analog there. Meanwhile, of course, Hindutva had managed to turn that massacre, the massacres and the home invasions and the assaults and the genocide into a war against Islamist terrorism. I think it's one of the most important things we can do to address the truth of what happened. Excuse me, that's all I had to say.
Thank you, Mary. You gave us just the analog of situation, that it was perhaps a planned scheme of things from the Indian government and then Governor Jagmohan to take away the Pandits from Kashmir and to massacre Kashmiri Muslims, and then give this movement the name of against the Islamic terrorism and so-called and so on. So we would like to hear more from you in coming minutes. So I will now straight away go to Shani Ahmed. who's a good friend of ours. Shani, your views, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much, my honorable friend. Thank you very much, all valuable participants. But on my behalf today, I'll highlight the rules of the engagement, if that's okay for you. And having this invaluable meeting as a key point, it is for me important to highlight and remember the precise definition of international human rights law, which says international human rights law is a set of international rules established by treaty or custom on the basis of which individuals and groups can expect and or claim certain rights and must be respected and protected by their states. Furthermore, the main treaties of human rights law are set as Convention of the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, Convention of the Elimination of all forms of racial discrimination, International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, Convention on the Elimination of all forms of discrimination against women, Convention against Torture and other inhuman, degrading treatments or punishment, Convention on the Rights of the Child, International Convention on the Protection of the Rights of all migrant workers and members of their families, International Convention for the Protection of all persons from enforced disappearances, Convention on the Rights of persons with disabilities. So we have so many conventions, as you can see. So ironically enough, India is signatory of these conventions, which means Indian government has committed to follow the articles of the international human rights law. If not, should face the necessary sanctions. Therefore, let's look at the reality now and think about the human rights abuses, enforced disappearances, mass killings, torture, rape, and sexual abuse, political repression, suppression of freedom of speech have become a daily practice in Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir, with a brutal human rights abuse application allowed by some Indian government representatives, and a practice field administered by Indian Army, Central Reserve Police Force, border security personnel, militant groups, and some individuals as well. In fact, one of the biggest massacres has become the shame of humanity in 1990 in Gaukadal Bridge, Srinagar, Kashmir. In that Black Day in Srinagar, some members of Indian police force have opened fire to peacefully demonstrating civilians in Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir, with resulting for around 300 victims' death. In fact, official figures from India indicates that more than 50,000 civilians killed only between 1989 and 1990. However, many human rights groups indicate this number as more than 100,000. This is official figures. The tragedy is Human Rights Watch in its 1993 report states that Indian security forces have indeed assaulted civilians during search operations, tortured and executed the detainees while in custody, and murdered civilians in reprisal acts. Even according to the UAE's State Department, Indian authorities do indeed use their Armed Forces Special Powers Act to avoid holding its security forces responsible for the deaths of civilians in Jammu and Kashmir. Well, long word short, everybody knows what's going on in Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir today. Alas, yet again, Next to nothing has been achieved towards ensuring peace for the residents in the occupied region. Basically, while in India settler colonialism and colonialism by Indian occupying forces continue to take its toll in the area, united colonialism, strengthened by the global trade players, does unfortunately play a supporting role with turning blind eye on human rights abuses in occupied Jammu and Kashmir. As India, amongst the leading countries in global trade today, with her territories Pacific strategy, she strongly covers NAFTA, ASEAN, WANA, CIS, plus many more strong association and formations, fulfilled with international trade, military, and business partnerships. So, with remembering every country's commitment to international human rights law, we need to keep asking to United Nations members, to the members of Organization of Islamic Cooperation, to World Bank, and to all world leaders, as well as the NGOs, groups, and individuals, to stop giving priority to global trade agendas and beneficial personal agendas. Also, we need to remember that media, human rights organizations, UN commissions of inquiries, NGOs, world leaders and individuals have a huge role in achieving peace in Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir. Besides working against corruption and keeping solidarity and determination is our only one single way to move forward towards eliminating brutal acts and towards achieving peace in Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir. So we need to continue our good work together. Thank you very much for having me today.
Thank you, Shani, for invoking some international human rights and humanitarian laws and the crimes against humanity by the Indian forces, and appeal to the global community to work together to unmask the Indian tyranny, to the international leaders who think about trade and commerce and just talk about human rights. So thank you very much. Before I go to Mary Guli's message, I will now request Aliza Sayed Sahab, who is the chair of Kashmir Council EU. Aliza Sayed Sahab, you have the floor.
Thank you, Vanisa. Thank you very much for having me. Good to see you, Mary, again.
Yes.
We were just in a program last week. And Shani, thank you for giving us the input about the laws. And so I think like Mr. Altaf Wani has said, he's leading the Kashmiris on the international front everywhere, from Geneva to Brussels to London to US, everywhere. Thank you, Vanisa, for raising the voices of the oppressed people of Jammu and Kashmir. So, we were talking about the Dhakadal massacre in 1990, where 50 civilians were killed and more than 200 were injured. Then again, as Vanisa has told us, that on 22nd of January 1990, there was again 10 people killed. And then 25th of January 1990, in Dwara region, there was 21 people. So if we see all these massacres which happened from 1990 up to now, there are, I think, in a way, the Indian occupation forces are doing in Jammu and Kashmir. They think that doing massacres, killing the youth, putting them into prison, raping the girls, they will succeed. They will subdue the people of Kashmir. But the time has shown that they are failed. And I think whatever the policy they can test in Kashmir to suppress the people of Kashmir, they will not succeed, because the people, they want their basic rights, and they are asking the promise made by the Indian Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru and the Indian government in United Nations. And we want to have the implementation of the resolutions. So I think now is the time we have to look back why these massacres were not brought to the international attention, or why the international community was silent on these massacres.
Yes.
I think the international community has a very important role to play. We have the documentation like JKCCS, an organization based in Srinagar, and they worked on the documenting all these atrocities committed by the Indian security forces. So we have all these documents. We have the documentation by other organizations also, even by the Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, and FIDH also issued the reports on what is happening in Kashmir. So I think now it's time for us that these crimes committed against humanity in Jammu and Kashmir, and we have to bring to the international forums like International Criminal Justice Court, International Court of Justice, International Criminal Court in The Hague, and other forums. And now, from 2 weeks ago, Stoke White law firm has introduced the case against the criminals, all those who committed the war crimes in Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir. So it started now, and let's hope that all those criminals who committed crimes against humanity, who committed crimes against the children, against the women, against the elderly people, all those will be punished, because up to now, the track record of the Indian government shows that not a single person was convicted. So is it happen in any other democracy? No. And the India called it the biggest democracy of the world, but the people, they don't have the right to speak. They don't have the right to ask for their basic rights. And if you see Asia State of Minority Report of 2021, they says that the BJP and the RSS-led government in India is encouraging hate and encouraging the violence against the minorities. It is happening in India, if they are especially against Muslims, but the Christians, Sikhs, and the Dalits as well. So I think it is high time for the international community to look into the issues and see where the Modi government is moving towards. Is Modi government is stabilizing the Asia, is stabilizing India? No. Modi government is destabilizing South Asia, they are destabilizing India, and I think they are leading India to the destruction because their act, their hate, their extremist policies, and their like Nazi German policies which the Hitler implemented in Europe, and what we have seen in Europe, the destruction. And that was due to the Hitler's policies. But at that time also, the other nations, they appeased the Hitler regime because it was democratically elected leader of Germany. But at the end, it shows that the fascist, even they are elected by the people, they are the danger for the whole humanity, they are danger for the other communities. So it's the same thing. I compare Modi regime to the Hitler's regime, because as what they are doing, they are killing innocent civilians with mob lynching. You will not see anywhere in the world what is happening in India. So the international community, I think, should come forward and should, it's high time to stop this. And the last warning which Genocide Watch president has given, I think it's alarming. And if we don't listen to his warning, we had in the past Rwanda genocide where millions of people were killed, but they issued the warning like this before the Rwanda genocide. Nobody listened, and afterwards they created the tribunal and everything. And for the India, I think it is the time. It is the time to listen what the international community is saying and what the Modi government is doing in Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir. It has to be stopped, and it will be stopped, and it will be stopped with the support of international community. And international community, UN, EU, they should play their role to stop this genocide which is occurring in Indian occupied Kashmir. And I think it is the only way forward is that the India, but not on the expenses of human rights, not on the expenses of the innocent people in Jammu and Kashmir. And I hope for when international community will come to the conclusion that Indian policies in Jammu and Kashmir and in India, they are danger to the South Asia's peace, and they are dangerous for the international peace. So I hope that it's the UN and EU will realize that. Thank you.
Thank you, Riza Said, for bringing up another dimension that Modi government is posing a threat to the peace in South Asia as the international peace and security, because the government is pursuing the policies of Nazis, this apartheid regime, currently not only perpetrating human rights violation in Kashmir, not only snatching the rights of the people of Indian occupied Kashmir, not only making people in Indian occupied Kashmir their life miserable, but the lives of the Indian minorities, Muslims, Christians, Sikhs, and other minorities miserable. And India is fast becoming a Hindu-Tao fascist regime, which has now, I think, crossed the borders of India to the Western countries also. We can see these hate mongers all over the world now. We have recently the report which Aliza Said was quoting about the minorities, Christian minorities in India, how many attacks have been carried on them in 2021. This speaks volumes of the hate crime which the BJP and RSS backed regime is doing in India, because all these incidents took place because of the hate speech of the highest leaders of BJP and RSS. It was not only because these were not occasional attacks, these were not just incidents, these were planned attacks on the minorities in India. I think now the West will have to realize that it is not Islamophobic only, it is not Islamophobia that you always mention about the religious extremism, Islamic religious extremism. It is now the Hindu extremism at peak, and it will pose a threat to the security of the South Asia and also the international peace and security. Thank you, Aliza Said, for your wonderful contribution. You mentioned about the Genocide Watch report. It's the president's warning, and only one step India is away from carrying out a genocide in Kashmir. When you decide the identity of the people through CA and NCA, other laws, you are making towards the genocide. This is a fast track strategy of the Indian government. But I think that you are in Brussels, you are in the second biggest power corridor at present. So responsibility on you lies more in order to convince the EU people. You have been doing a wonderful job there in past. You are able to make inroads in the European Parliament at many occasions. And I hope in future we will see more and more voices from the European Parliament speaking against these human rights violations in India as well as in Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir, which is our prime subject today. Now I will also bring in message of Claire Bedwell, a good friend of Kashmir. She's started with Mary. They are doing a wonderful job. Let the Kashmiris decide, giving people their voice. And a day before, they were with Aliza Said, and they have this awareness program at the global level. We have Mary's message, because she was not able to join us because of her duties. So here is her message. Mary, message.
Hello, my name is Claire Bidwell. I'm a human rights activist and a primary school teacher from Scotland on the Isle of Mull. It's a pleasure to be invited along here this afternoon to discuss the massacres that have occurred at the hands of the Indian Army. And what I'd like to do with my short message is to convey the fact that it's very difficult for me as a Scottish person to retain all the information about the history of Kashmir, all the resolutions, everything that has happened. There is just so much, and I find it very traumatic as a human being. Just watching that and listening to that, it's incredibly traumatic. I think what I would like to use my opportunity to do to talk for is about, you know, where we have been, where we are now, and where we want to go, and looking for solutions in memory of all the people that have died, that have lost their lives. How are we going to take this forward? What are we going to do? So one of the things I'm working on with my team is a human rights charter, which we are looking to, a human rights mandate, which we are looking for support from many people around the world. And it's asking and requesting for justice for the people of Kashmir that have never had their justice for these crimes that have been committed. It is asking for the release of political prisoners. It is asking for removal of the troops from the area, a demilitarization. It's looking forward with peace and for the Kashmiris to have their voice, and ultimately self-determination for the Kashmiri people. a right to decide their own future. And we're looking to share this around Kashmiri groups, Kashmiri activists, and get as many people's name to it as we can. It's something that we should all be able to gather around, regardless of ideologies about where you want to see Kashmir going. And, you know, we're going to take that forward. I stay active in my work with my step one focus, my key focus of raising awareness. And that's my job as I see it, the role that I can play in the Western world. Ever since I came to hear of the lockdown in 2019, I just couldn't believe the injustice, how that could happen. I've learned a lot in my last 2.5-year journeys, and I've been embraced by the Kashmiri community and in organizations internationally and nationally, and so have learned so much, but probably not as many people as the people speaking here this afternoon about the dreadful massacres. So I wanted to come in with some kind of encouragement and hope, and to give some memory to these people that have lost their lives with ways of going forward. As Let Kashmir Decide movement, we have an event every 5th of every month, Solidarity for Kashmir, where we encourage all people around the globe to have tea with us. Share that day, anybody, just for the human rights issues, raising that and bringing attention to the Kashmiris, to the Kashmiri plights, to the various solutions, the steps forward. And hope, you know, is about more power, the power of the people, you know, and that if we do want something, we should be able to get it. And it's up to the people to raise the voices. I don't see this as an issue between India and Pakistan. I see this as a world problem, in terms of others are just standing by and watching this and allowing this to happen. I find that fully unacceptable, and this is why I think it's important that we share the voice, that we unite together. We mustn't allow the divide and rule to cause out petty arguments. We must always be looking for the ways to unite and take it forward. So we've come on a long journey. I think there's been a lot of unity built and a solidarity movement of a small nature over the last 2 years, but we need to build it bigger. We need to reach out for more people, other people, and we need to get on the street. And COVID has stopped a lot of that restriction. So coordinated efforts, recognizing that India as colonial occupiers and moving in all the time against international laws, against the Geneva Convention, historically and currently. We're seeing human rights defenders being silenced, and again, yeah, that's completely unacceptable. Human rights defenders who stand and fight for the world and freedom of everybody, and they're being locked up, out of the way. We're seeing journalists silenced. You know, even the main Kashmir News Press Centre closed down. It's scary. It's frightening. But we're all a party to this. We all have our role to play. We all have something to do, and it's up to us. It's completely up to us what we do, where we put our efforts and where we share that. And so it's about, for me, looking forward. You know, we have to look forward. What can we do differently? How can we learn from the past in hoping to stop any of these massacres ever happening again? So as my organisation says, Let Kashmir Decide. That's what we're ultimately campaigning for, trying to come up with original and different ideas. We're starting on this month. There's a promo competition for the best TikTok. Get the best TikTok in there. It's a £100 prize to promote the solidarity event. You just need to look for us on Let Kashmir Decide or Claire Bidwell, and we have a website, www.letkashmirdecide. And you know, there's a mix of people there from all across the world who have hearts and feeling for the Kashmiris. And it's not about telling the Kashmiris how to solve their problem. That is very much for the Kashmiris. I'm not Kashmiri, but I feel the pain. I feel that, and I'm very grateful that I don't walk in those steps. So I know that if I was in their situation, I would want people on the outside world speaking up for us. So it's just the raising those voices and lifting those stories and trying to reach as many people as we can. So I'm grateful for everybody that's here this afternoon. I hope my message has in some way helped to instill some belief that people are with the Kashmiris. They don't like what they're seeing. They don't like all these human rights abuses. And to be honest, you know, we're seeing something out. Well, it's worse than any nightmares I've seen, and nightmares. It's worse than any horror movie that I've ever seen, you know, and they're living with that every day. And we're also, you know, we have to look at the fear, the mental consequences. And, you know, this has been going back generations, and science has already proved that, you know, certain genes carry down through the generations with those trauma, anxieties and things before them. So it's really important that, you know, we work and we keep reaching out to politicians, we keep reaching out to the United Nations, we keep looking at the research which institutions like CUR are taking forward, looking at the human rights abuses, and to all organisations that are taking it. I mean, the other thing is, obviously, we need to push for human rights envoys to be allowed into Indian-occupied Kashmir. It's quite shocking that they're able to just push the world away when they are, Modi and the BJP government are a danger to the world. You know, it's creating instability in the east, and then further with the powerful weapons that we have these days. And I know, for example, for me, I feel my country that we need to step forward and look at associating human rights with trade deals. We cannot be looking at just money and economy. I mean, I think we all know human rights is the way forward. I mean, it empowers people. How much better is it when we are, you know, living without a fear of being massacred? So that's my message this afternoon, and thank you so much for letting me be a part of this. And take care and all the best, and we'll keep working forward, doing the best we can. Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Mary, for your wonderful message. You brought in the humanitarian and humanity aspect in the discussion, and you're a wonderful person with a wonderful heart, feeling the pain of Kashmiris and doing a great job to mobilize support for the people of Kashmir around the globe with different tools, with innovative ways, making people aware of the situation of Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir. I think, though we were discussing the massacres, one point which Claire brought in was the silencing of human rights defenders and journalists in Kashmir, defenders in Indian occupied Kashmir. Khurram Parvez was detained in forces. He's lodged in Delhi's Tihar jail. He's under the custody. His judicial remand has been extended again. And we all know that Khurram Parvez is an internationally acclaimed human rights defender. He has his fans all over the world. And a few days back, I had the opportunity to attend a webinar which was attended by all the international human rights groups and special rapporteur on human rights defenders. Mary Lawler was also present in that. She also showed her concern and her displeasure the way Indian government is looking at the things and the way the Indian government is acting on the requests of the human rights mechanisms, UN human rights mechanisms, and the calls from the international human rights defenders to release Khurram Parvez. And after Khurram Parvez, when Khurram was detained, I must tell you, as Riza Said must be knowing it, our another human rights defender, Mohammed Asanontu, who was also detained. When Khurram was detained, he told me on phone that now I think it is my turn, but I can survive in the jail. How can Khurram survive? Because Khurram is a disabled person. Khurram's one leg was lost during when he was monitoring the elections in 1996. His leg is amputated. So there are ways and means that Khurram needs the support of all of us. And I'll like now Mary to have some words on Khurram and Asanontu. Well, Asanontu is a foot soldier on the ground who would report, who would write, who would protest in his own ways on the ground and will raise the voice. He will use all the local means, file FIRs, while Khurram was an internationally acclaimed. He was the only source of information while from the UN human rights mechanism and international human rights groups could get the information, could get the on-ground situation, what's actually happening and how it's happening. He was a credible voice, and that voice was heard. It was because of his voice we could see the 2 reports of the UN High Commissioner's Office. We could see lots of communications to the government of India due to the Khurram's voice, and now that voice has been silenced, and other human rights defenders like Parvez Imroz, Parveena Hangar, and others, they are asked to stop their work. Their houses are raided. Their all documentation have been confiscated by the government of India. And so is the case of journalists like most recently we see the Sajjad Gul, a journalist, being taken into custody by the Indian forces. And all those charges which are being leveled against all these human rights defenders, before they used the NIA as a tool to discredit and defame the political leadership of Kashmir, now they are defaming and discrediting the human rights voices of Kashmir and also the journalists of Kashmir. Very quickly, I would like to have your some thoughts on this and how the Free Khurram campaign is going on.
Yes, well, as Claire pointed out, the Let Kashmir Decide coalition has made the defense of political prisoners one of its primary principles, because the reason that India, most of us, people like me and Claire and others, the reason that we know anything about Kashmir is from Kashmiri activists, journalists and citizen journalists and human rights activists on social media who presented their case, presented articles, presented post after post after post. There were thousands of them. And India went on a campaign with social media to convince them to remove them, and thousands of these activists have been removed permanently from Twitter. You'll see now that they always keep trying to open new accounts under false names, because if they go on under them, arrested and interrogated, and so they come back on under false names, and they'll have 100 followers. So that meanwhile, the Kashmir police and the Indian Army have thousands of followers, and all of the Hindutva crowd have thousands of followers spewing the lies about Kashmir and about Yasin Malik being a terrorist, and blah, blah, blah goes on. And so in the absence of those journalists and citizen journalists and activists on social media, we have to make their defense a primary campaign. The main reason, as you pointed out, that they are targeted, that the journalists and human rights activists are targeted, is because from their reports, we know what happened. The Jammu Kashmir Coalition of Civil Society website, which Khurram Parvez headed up, that website is full of long investigative reports about the human rights crimes in Kashmir. It's still up. India hasn't managed to remove it. It's an invaluable resource. And the Indian government doesn't want that information out. And so the best way to keep it out is to silence them by putting them in prison. And it remains our primary goal to campaign for them and to get them released. And I think the campaign is more difficult now because India plays a very vital role, not just economically, but militarily in the South Asian region, especially in the United States campaign against China and in Israel's campaign against the Palestinians. It plays a very vital role. And because of that, we're aligned against much more significant forces who want our voices and Kashmiri voices silenced. So we have a very difficult campaign ahead, but the primary thing is to demand the removal of Indian troops and the release of all political prisoners, the thousands of political prisoners.
Thank you, Mary. Shani, your take on it.
Thank you very much, my honorable friend, and thank you very much, Honorable Mary Scully, Secretariat Kashmir of European Union, friend, your friend Claire Saab Altaf. You are absolutely spot on and absolutely right. Now we need to work on our solidarity and determination. And also we need to focus and understand that many associations, organizations, formations, the European Union, United Nations, organizations of Islamic corporations, and WANA, NAFTA, World Bank, and all our NGOs, all our specific groups working on their own guidelines and agendas, then coming also together to work on the global agenda. And we have to remember to eliminate these global headlines and agendas from the local headlines and agendas. And when we go to that simple steps, we will go to the basics and we will ask to all participants eventually keep screaming and shouting about human rights everywhere in the world, not only in Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir. And we'll go back and understand that at times, trade agendas are taking more priorities over the human rights and international human rights law. So here we come. What we need to do, invaluable individuals, invaluable organizations and leaders and world leaders and NGOs and institutions like yourselves, all these participants of this panel and all our participants, humanity today. We need to just remember and continue pressing together again back to solidarity and determination and keep pushing all these international law, international human rights law and conventions done for the humanity. And remind everyone that these trade agendas and inconsistencies between the international law and the law of the treaties and the local law has to stop. We need to work on focus on stopping the corruption. Media has an important role, and individuals like all these panels, participants, and all the participants of today and the future have an important role and say. So we need to press on stopping the global trade agendas over the international human rights law. And this is how we're going to achieve it, with determination and solidarity like you have done and showed today, and inconsistency. Really, we need to push for it. Nobody gonna stop us. We will need to get together, put our differences aside, and get together and work for it. Plus, first things first, we need to focus and push and lobby for stopping this Indian Armed Forces Special Powers Act's brutalities. That has to stop. Because how India is doing today is pushing our Indian Armed Forces Special Powers Act and just keep doing whatever can do in Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir. So we need to focus on that act, as United Nations also had admitted there are many brutalities in that act and many undemocratic applications. So here we are, we need to lobby to stop that act as first things first, and we need to focus on trying to make living conditions more acceptable for our brothers and sisters in Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir. I'm happy to be with you all the way. That's my promise. Thank you very much for having me. Thank you.
Thank you, Shani. As per the Armed Force Special Powers Act is concerned, we have seen in 3 UPRs which have been held by the United Nations Human Rights Council of India. In all those 3 UPRs, India was asked to repeal the Armed Force Special Power Act, and which India did agree that they will, even if they will not repeal, they will amend it, but they have not done it. India was asked in those 3 UPRs to ratify the Convention Against Torture, but they did not. They were asked to ratify the Convention Against Enforced Disappearances, which they did not. But what they did, instead of invoke now the UAPA in Kashmir, though this law was there for 1967, but this has been recently amended and invoked in Indian occupied Kashmir in order to silence the journalists and social media activists and all those activists, human rights defenders who can write or speak. And it's the government who can decide, government officer, what is against the state, what is not, like that in the Armed Force Special Power Act. But we will have to keep our fight. We will have to keep to knock the doors of the international community. We will have to keep on hammering their conscience and telling them time and again about these happenings and about the attitude and arrogant attitude of the Indian government towards the human rights systems globally. But unfortunately, what we saw the last time when India was elected to this Human Rights Council, again, the countries voted for them, not taking into the consideration the pledges and promises which India made before that, becoming the member of the council. But again, those promises and pledges remained on the paper. They were not translated into action. So the last word I will like to request Aliza Saeed. You had yesterday a very powerful protest for Kurum Pervez, for Asanantu, and release of Sajjad, as well as the extrajudicial execution of Zia Mustafa at Brussels. Zia Mustafa's case, as you started said, is now in the London police, is with the crime branch unit of the London police, as the Stoke White has filed an act of Zia Mustafa and torture of Muhammad Asanantu before he was arrested. Aliza Saeed, your last words, please. Aliza Saeed, sir, do you hear me? Aliza Saeed, do you hear me? Unmute yourself. Unmute yourself.
The voice was not clear, but anyway, now it's okay. Thank you, Vanessa. I think as far as Khurram Parvez, Asan, Sajjad Gul, and many more who are in prison there, and including I think tried to silence the political leadership, then the political activists, and they thought that they will succeed in to obtain their objectives, but they were failed. And now they turned against the human rights activists, against the students, and against the journalists. And this is, I think it's a very serious issue now. It means the Indian government will try whatever is possible for them to crush the aspiration of people of Jammu and Kashmir and to continue the atrocities which they are committing for last 74 years. But now, Kashmir Council issue, we are trying here in Europe to 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 launch the campaign for the free political prisoners and especially the human rights activists and the journalists. Khurram Parvez, Ahsan Anto, and Sajjad Gul. So this campaign, we already in touch with the European Parliament. Today, I was in the Parliament just to see, because of Corona SOPs and Corona restrictions, our campaign is a little slow. But I think in coming days, the situation is going to be better. And then we will launch full-scale campaign to release the human rights activists and the political prisoners without charges. They were in Indian jails. So I hope that we have to have a coordination with other organizations. I talked to Claire also the other day. We were talking with Mary also, that we have to have a coordinated efforts from wherever we are. We have to have the same type of pressure going on civil society, with the people, the local population, and the student universities. We are targeting the student, the universities also, because these are the future leader and the future people of their countries. So we have to focus on them also, and I hope that the pressure we will be able to build the pressure on India to release all those political prisoners. And as Mary said before, it's the people that they have as well, because Modi government is not only destroying other countries, they are Modi is trying to destroy India. So if the Indian civil society want to save the India, they have to come out against these monster policies and the fascist policies of Modi government in India and in Kashmir. So I hope that we will launch this campaign, free Khurram, free Anto, and free Sajjad Gul with full space, inshallah, in coming days.
Thank you, Lisa. Say thank you, Marisukuli. Thank you, Shani, and also Claire for her message. This is all we have today, and hope we will keep on talking together. We will keep on brainstorming together to see the future opportunities, how we can coordinate, how we can move ahead, how we can find ways and means to make India in Kashmir, and we also will be able to launch a global human rights campaign, as Shani said, that it should be linked with the human rights, should be linked with the trade deals and all those things. For that, there should be a global human rights campaign for that, and we ought to be the part of that. That will make our cause easier to understand. And Riza said, but you said we are targeting the university students and civil society. That is the most valuable thing, because unless and until we see the pressure from the Western civil society, Western educational institutions on their policy makers, things will not move in the right direction. Thank you all for your company. Thank you, Mary. You can go and sleep now. You can have a very good sleep. And Shani, you can have a tea after lunch, but what we call it, a tea. And that's
5 o'clock tea in England.
And I will go and have dinner. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bless you all.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you. So nice.
Bye.